I never thought I'd be the one to tell a story like this. Funny how life works out that way. One minute you're just another grunt in the frozen hills of Korea, and the next, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Robert Jennings. Everyone called me Bobby back then. I was 20 years old when I shipped out to Korea in 1951. Just a farm boy from Nebraska who'd barely seen the next county over, let alone the world. I enlisted because my father and his father had both served. It seemed like the natural thing to do. The Korean Peninsula. They don't call it the land of the morning calm for nothing. It's beautiful country, or at least it was before we all tore it to hell. Mountains jutting up like they're trying to pierce the sky. Valleys so green in spring it hurts your eyes. But I didn't appreciate any of that when I first arrived. All I felt was the cold. Dear God, the cold. November 1951. I'd been in country about 3 months by then, assigned to the 7th Infantry Division. We were positioned near the 38th parallel, that arbitrary line dividing north from south. The linemen were dying over every day. You know what they don't tell you about war? It's mostly waiting. Waiting in your foxhole. Waiting for orders. Waiting for mail from home. Waiting for the enemy to make a move. And in Korea, waiting to stop feeling like your blood was turning to ice in your veins. Chill, man. Jennings. Coffee's up. That was Sarge, Staff Sergeant William Peterson from Chicago. Built like a brick wall with a voice to match. But he looked after us boys like we were his own. Coming, Sarge. I called back, pulling myself out of my foxhole. My joints cracked from the cold. 3 months in, and I still wasn't used to it. Our company was spread across a ridgeline overlooking a valley where intelligence said Chinese forces were massing. We'd been there for a week, improving our positions, digging deeper foxholes, setting up interlocking fields of fire. The usual. I made my way over to where Peterson was standing next to a small fire, carefully shielded to minimize visibility. It wasn't regulation, but command looked the other way when temperatures dropped below freezing. Men needed to warm their hands sometimes, or they couldn't pull a trigger when they needed to. Here you go, Nebraska, Peterson said, handing me a tin cup of something that vaguely resembled coffee. Drink up before it freezes. Next to him stood Mickey Callahan from Boston, all nervous energy and quick smiles. And Davis, the quiet one from Georgia who kept a Bible in his breast pocket. We'd all shipped over together, trained together, became brothers in all but blood. Mail came, Mickey said, excitement clear in his voice. Johnson's passing it out now. Mail call was the closest thing to heaven in that frozen hell. A letter from home could keep a man going for days. Anything for me? I asked, trying not to sound too eager. Thick envelope for you, Nebraska, Davis said with a nod. Looked like your girl's handwriting. He meant Elaine. We'd been sweethearts since high school. She wrote me faithfully every week, sending photos and news from home and promises for when I return. I kept her picture in my helmet liner. Brown hair, bright smile, eyes that seemed to look right through you. When things got rough, I'd look at that photo and remember what I was fighting for. Speaking of mail, Mickey said, lowering his voice, did you guys hear about Thompson? We all grew quiet. Thompson had been with us since basic. Last week, he'd gotten a letter from home. His wife was leaving him for his cousin. That night, he volunteered for a patrol, came back carried by his buddies with a Chinese bullet through his chest. Poor bastard, Peterson muttered. That's why I never married. That's not why, Sarge. Mickey laughed. It's because no woman would have you. Peterson cuffed him lightly on the back of the head, but he was smiling too. These small moments of normalcy kept us sane. I finished my coffee and handed the cup back to Peterson. I'm going to see if Johnson's got my letter. Don't read it all at once. Mickey called after me. Gotta make those sweet nothings last. I found Johnson near the command tent, a sack of mail at his feet as he called out names. I waited until he got to the J's. Jennings! 2 for you, lucky dog. 2 envelopes. 1 from Elaine, as expected. The other from my mother. I tucked them inside my jacket to read in private. Letters from home were sacred, not to be shared with the prying eyes of your buddies. Back at my foxhole, I settled in and opened my mother's letter first. News from the farm. Dad's back was acting up again, but he wouldn't slow down. My younger brother Billy had made the high school basketball team. Mom had put up extra preserves for winter and wished she could send me some. Normal things that seemed like dispatches from another planet. Then Elaine's letter. I saved it for last, like dessert. 8 pages of her neat handwriting, front and back. She wrote about everything and nothing. The town dance I was missing. Her job at the telephone company. How she'd taken to wearing my Letterman jacket, even though it was too big for her. Plans for when I got home. Marriage, a small house, children. When you get back, She wrote, not if, never if. I won't accept anything but when. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my breast pocket, right next to my heart. Letters like that kept a man going. Gave him something to fight for beyond abstract notions of democracy versus communism. Night fell early that time of year. The temperature dropped even further. I huddled in my foxhole with Davis, who had drawn watch duty with me. He was reading his Bible by flashlight, the beam carefully shielded. Find any answers in there? I asked him. Davis looked up, his dark face thoughtful in the dim light. Not answers exactly. Comfort, maybe. Reminds me there's something bigger than all this. He gestured vaguely at our surroundings. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I agreed. If there was something bigger, it seemed to have abandoned this particular corner of creation. My grandmother, Davis continued, she used to say that God speaks in whispers, not shouts. You gotta be real quiet to hear him. Not much chance of that in a war zone, I said. Davis smiled slightly. You'd be surprised. Sometimes it's in the chaos that you hear him most clearly. I didn't know what to say to that, so I changed the subject. How much longer on watch? 2 hours. Then Williams and Preston take over. I nodded and settled in for a long, cold night. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the sun glinting off the snow-covered mountains. Beautiful if you could forget where you were and why. Captain Harris called a briefing after breakfast. Our platoon gathered around, stomping our feet to keep warm, as he spread out a map on the hood of a Jeep. Intelligence reports increased enemy movement in this sector, he said, pointing to the valley below our position. We think they're preparing for a push towards Seoul. Our job is to hold this ridgeline at all costs. He went on detailing our defensive positions, ammunition supplies, evacuation routes if things went south. The usual briefing, but there was an edge to his voice that hadn't been there before. Questions? He asked finally. Air support? Peterson asked. Limited. Weather's supposed to turn bad again by tomorrow. We might be on our own for a while. No one liked the sound of that. Air support had saved our asses more than once. Artillery? Someone else asked. 2 batteries about 5 miles back. They've got us registered, but ammunition is limited. Don't call for it unless you absolutely need it. After the briefing broke up, I found Mickey loading ammunition crates onto a truck. What do you think? I asked him. I think the brass knows something they're not telling us, he said, grunting as he lifted another crate. Too many supply runs, too much urgency. Something big's coming. I helped him with the crates. Maybe they just want us prepared. When has the Army ever been that forward-thinking? Mickey snorted. Nah, they know the Chinese are planning something. The question is what and when. I couldn't argue with his logic. There had been a flurry of activity in the last 48 hours. Ammunition resupplies, extra rations distributed. Medical units moved closer to the front. That afternoon, I wrote letters home. One to my parents telling them I was fine, the food was decent, and the war would surely be over soon. All lies, but comforting ones. Another to Elaine, full of promises about our future and descriptions of the Korean countryside that carefully omitted any mention of danger or death. As I was sealing the envelopes, Peterson came by. Double-check your gear, Jennings. Clean your rifle. Make sure you've got full ammunition pouches. Something happening, Sarge? He looked around before answering, his voice low. Word from regiment is the Chinese are massing for an attack. Could come tonight. Could come tomorrow. Just be ready. I nodded, suddenly feeling very young and very far from Nebraska. I'm ready. Peterson clapped me on the shoulder. You're a good soldier, Jennings. Keep your head down and you'll be fine. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cold was part of it, sure, but mostly it was the waiting. The knowing that something was coming, but not when or where or how bad it would be. I thought about home, about my parents' farm with its endless fields of corn stretching to the horizon, about summer evenings on the porch with fireflies blinking in the darkness, about Elaine's laugh and the way her hand fit perfectly in mine, about who I had been before all this and who I would be after, if there was an after. Around midnight, it started to snow. Light flurries at first, then heavier. The visibility dropped to almost nothing. Perfect weather for an attack. Jennings, a voice whispered, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was Davis coming to relieve me on watch. All quiet? He asked, settling in beside me. Too quiet, I said, then felt foolish for the cliché. But it was true. No distant artillery, no flares lighting the sky, no sound at all except the soft hiss of falling snow. I don't like it, Davis agreed. Something's not right. I should have gone to my foxhole to get some sleep, but I stayed with Davis, both of us scanning the darkness for any movement, any sign. The hours crept by, marked only by the slow accumulation of snow on our helmets and shoulders. Dawn came gray and indistinct, the sun a pale smear behind clouds heavy with more snow. The landscape had been transformed overnight, all harsh edges softened by a blanket of white. It would have been peaceful if not for the knowledge that somewhere out there, men were preparing to kill us. Breakfast, Peterson announced, coming around with a pot of something hot. Eat while you can. I took the offered mug gratefully, more for the warmth in my hands than any desire for food. Military rations were designed for survival, not enjoyment. Any movement? Peterson asked Davis and me. Nothing, Davis answered. Too quiet, Peterson nodded grimly. Battalion says their listening post picked up vehicle movement about 5 miles north. Lots of it. Tanks? I asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Maybe troop carriers. Hard to tell, but something's happening. We finished our breakfast in silence, each lost in his own thoughts. Around us, the company was stirring. Men checking weapons, adjusting positions, preparing for whatever was coming. Captain Harris called another briefing at 0800. His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Gentlemen, he began, intelligence confirms that Chinese and North Korean forces are massing for a major offensive. We believe they will attack along this entire front, possibly as soon as tonight. A murmur ran through the assembled men. We'd all suspected it, but hearing it confirmed made it suddenly terrifyingly real. Our orders are to hold this position as long as possible, Harris continued. Give our forces further south time to prepare. I won't lie to you. It's going to be tough. They'll have numbers on their side, but we have better positions, better training, and better artillery support. He paused, looking each of us in the eye. Any questions? There were none. What was there to ask? We all knew what was expected of us. Check your weapons, Harris finished. Check your ammunition. And pray to whatever God you believe in that the weather clears enough for air support. As we dispersed, Mickey fell in step beside me. Well, Nebraska, looks like we're in for a party. I tried to match his light tone. Yeah, but I don't much like the guest list. Mickey laughed, but it sounded forced. Listen, if things go sideways... He hesitated. I've got a letter in my footlocker. For my mom. Would you make sure she gets it? The request hit me like a physical blow. We all wrote just in case. Letters, but actually discussing them felt like tempting fate. Nothing's going to happen to you, I said firmly. But yeah, I'll make sure she gets it. And you'll do the same for me? Count on it. Mickey punched me lightly on the arm. Though your girl would probably come to Korea herself to find that letter. I smiled at the thought of Elaine, 5'0" of pure determination, marching into a war zone. She probably would. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Checking and rechecking weapons. Distributing extra ammunition. Reinforcing foxholes. The snowfall stopped around noon, but heavy clouds promised more to come. As dusk approached, the tension was so thick you could almost touch it. Men spoke in whispers, if at all. Every eye was trained on the valley below, straining to see through the gathering darkness. I was back in my foxhole, Davis beside me. We had a good field of fire covering the most likely approach route. Between us were enough grenades and ammunition to hold off a small army. At least that's what we told ourselves. Hey, Davis, I said quietly. Remember what you said about God speaking in whispers? He nodded, eyes still scanning the distance. I could use some of that comfort right about now. Davis smiled slightly and reached into his pocket for his Bible. It fell open to a well-worn page. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Psalm 23, I said. My mother had made sure I knew my Bible, even if I didn't always live by it. My favorite, Davis confirmed. Reminds me that no matter what happens here, it's not the end. I wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe there was something more than just this frozen hillside and the violence that was about to erupt on it. Thanks, I said simply. Davis nodded and tucked the Bible away. Get some rest if you can. I'll wake you if anything happens. I must have dozed off despite the tension, because the next thing I knew, Davis was shaking me awake. They're coming, he whispered. I was instantly alert, rifle in hand, peering into the darkness. At first I saw nothing. Then gradually I made out movement in the valley below. A lot of movement. Jesus, I breathed. How many? Too many to count, Davis replied grimly. Regiment says at least a division, maybe more. A Chinese division, thousands of men. Against our one depleted company. The radio crackled to life. Captain Harris's voice, tense but controlled. All units, stand by. Let them get within range. Wait for my signal. We waited, hardly daring to breathe as the dark mass of Chinese soldiers drew closer. They were advancing openly, not even trying for stealth. They knew we were here. They just didn't care. They had the numbers to absorb whatever we could throw at them. Range 800 yards. Someone reported over the radio. Stand by, Harris repeated. 700 yards. 600. The Chinese were close enough now that I could make out individual figures. Dark shapes moving through the snow. Fire, Harris commanded. The night erupted. Every weapon in our company opened up at once. Rifles cracked. Machine guns chattered. Mortars thumped. The dark mass of Chinese soldiers faltered as our first volley tore through their ranks. But they kept coming. Another volley. And another. I fired my M1 as fast as I could work the action, barely taking time to aim in the gathering darkness. Next to me, Davis was doing the same, his face set in grim concentration. The Chinese returned fire, their weapons spitting tracers that arced overhead or thudded into the earth around us. I kept my head down, reloading when necessary, firing when I had a target. They're flanking right, someone shouted over the din. Peterson's voice hoarse with urgency. Baker and Charlie squads, shift fire right. Don't let them get around us. I kept firing, my world narrowed to the small field of view through my foxhole. Fire, reload, fire again. The rhythm of battle taking over from conscious thought. Then came the sound we'd been dreading. The distinctive crump of mortar rounds leaving tubes. Incoming! Multiple voices shouted at once. I pressed myself into the earth as the first rounds landed. Too far behind us. The Chinese hadn't found the range yet. But they would. Another volley of mortar fire, closer this time. The ground shook. Somewhere to my left, a man screamed. The radio crackled again. All units, this is 6. Fire mission approved. Danger close. Repeat, danger close. Our artillery was going to fire almost on top of our positions. It was risky, but we needed it. The Chinese were still coming, wave after wave of them. Get down, Peterson shouted. Artillery incoming. I pressed myself deeper into my foxhole, Davis doing the same beside me. Seconds later, the world seemed to explode as our 105mm howitzers opened up. The shells screamed overhead and detonated among the advancing Chinese. The flashes lit up the night, revealing the carnage for split seconds at a time. The Chinese attack faltered under the artillery barrage. For a moment, I thought we might hold. Then I heard a new sound. Engines. Lots of them. Tanks! Someone shouted. They've got tanks! Cold fear gripped me. Our position was good against infantry, but tanks were another matter entirely. We had few anti-tank weapons, and those we had were in short supply. The Chinese tanks ground forward, machine guns blazing, main guns seeking out our positions. Behind them came fresh waves of infantry, using the armor for cover. Bazooka teams up, Harris ordered over the radio. Everyone else, focus on the infantry. I kept firing, picking my targets carefully now to conserve ammunition. The battle had been raging for over an hour, and I was down to my last few clips. A tremendous explosion rocked the night as one of our bazooka teams scored a hit on a Chinese tank. The vehicle ground to a halt, flames licking from its hatches. A cheer went up from our lines, quickly silenced as the other tanks adjusted their fire. The mortar rounds were getting closer now. The Chinese had found our range. Explosions walked across our position, showering us with dirt and shrapnel. Davis, I shouted over the din, we need to... The world went white. A mortar round must have landed directly in front of our foxhole. The blast picked me up and threw me backward like a rag doll. I hit the ground hard, all the air driven from my lungs. For a moment, everything went quiet. The gunfire, the explosions, the screams, all muted as if I was underwater. I tried to move but couldn't. Tried to call for help, but no sound came. I remember looking up at the night sky. The clouds had parted and stars were visible. So many stars. So bright. I had a fleeting thought that I'd never noticed how beautiful they were. Then the pain hit. White-hot agony that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I tried to scream but could only manage a whimper. Someone was beside me suddenly. Mickey, his face streaked with dirt and blood, his mouth moving but the words not reaching me. I tried to ask about Davis, but I couldn't form the words. Mickey was working frantically, doing something to my chest. It hurt. God, it hurt. More faces appeared. Peterson, the company medic. Their expressions told me everything I needed to know. I was dying. The thought should have terrified me, but strangely, it didn't. Maybe I was in shock. Maybe I was beyond fear. All I knew was that the pain was starting to recede, replaced by a cold numbness that spread from my extremities inward. I thought of Elaine waiting for me back home, of my parents and brother, of the life I'd never get to live. There was regret there, certainly, but also a curious acceptance. The stars seemed to be getting brighter. Or was my vision fading? Hard to tell. Mickey was still there, still talking, though I couldn't hear him. I wanted to tell him it was okay, that he'd done his best, that he should take care of himself now. Darkness was creeping in from the edges of my vision, the world narrowing to a small circle of light. Within that circle, the faces of my friends growing increasingly distant. And then something strange happened. As the darkness closed in, a new light appeared. Not the harsh glare of flares or explosions, but something softer, warmer. It started as a pinpoint, like a single star growing brighter, then expanded. The battlefield, the pain, the fear, all receded as this new light grew. It enveloped me, wrapped around me like a blanket. Within it, I felt a profound sense of peace, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I was moving somehow, though I had no sense of my body, moving toward the source of the light. It grew brighter, more intense, but it didn't hurt my eyes. If anything, it was welcoming, beckoning. Then within the light, I began to see something. Shapes, figures, people? Yes, people, though indistinct, like shadows against the brightness. One stepped forward, becoming clearer as it approached. A soldier dressed in the same combat gear as me, but unmarked by blood or dirt. His face was familiar, though I couldn't place it at first. Thompson? I said, or thought I said. No sound came, but the figure nodded. Thompson, who died a week earlier. Thompson, who should not be here, wherever here was. He smiled, a genuine smile without the pain that had marked his features after receiving that devastating letter from home. It's good to see you, Jennings, he said, though I heard the words inside my mind rather than with my ears. Am I? I couldn't finish the question. Not quite, Thompson replied. Not yet. You're in between. In between what? Life and what comes after. Other figures were coming forward now, becoming clearer. Some I recognized, men from our company who had fallen in previous engagements. Others wore uniforms from different eras. World War II, World War I, even some that looked like Civil War uniforms. Well, what is this place? I asked. A way station, Thompson said. A gathering point. Some call it the Valley of the Shadow. I remember Davis reading from Psalm 23 just hours earlier. Had it only been hours? Time seemed to have no meaning here. Why am I here? I asked. Because you have a choice to make, Thompson said. You can come with us, into the light. He gestured behind him, where the light seemed to open up into some vast, beautiful space I couldn't quite comprehend. Or you can go back. Back to what? The battle? My broken body? Yes. It won't be easy. You're badly wounded. The recovery will be long and painful. But it is possible. I looked toward the light, feeling its pull. The peace it offered was tempting. So tempting. No more war. No more pain. No more cold Korean hillsides and the constant fear of death. But then I thought of Elaine, of the promises I'd made her, of my parents, who had already lost one son in World War II. Could I choose to leave them behind? As I hesitated, Thompson spoke again. There's something else you should know. If you go back, it's for a reason. But what reason? A message. Something to share. Something important. What message? Thompson smiled sadly. That's for you to learn if you choose to return. I can't tell you. I looked back toward where I'd come from. Though I couldn't see the battlefield anymore, I could sense it. The chaos, the suffering, the fear. Going back meant returning to all of that. And yet, how do I choose? I asked. You already are, Thompson said. Every moment you're choosing. Your thoughts, your focus, they're pulling you one way or the other. I realized he was right. When I thought of the light, I drifted toward it. When I thought of Elaine, of home, of unfinished business, I felt myself being tugged the other way. If I go back, I said slowly, will I remember any of this? Some do, Thompson replied. Some don't. It depends on many things, but the message, that will stay with you one way or another. More figures were emerging from the light now. Hundreds of them. Thousands. An army of the fallen watching silently, waiting. And among them, one figure that made my non-existent heart stop. Michael? I whispered. My brother stepped forward, looking exactly as he had in the last photo taken before he shipped out to the Pacific in 1944, before the telegram that destroyed my parents' world. Hello, little brother, he said, smiling that crooked smile I tried so hard to imitate as a child. Mike, I had so many questions, so many things to say, but all I could manage was his name. You've grown up, he said. Mom and Dad would be proud. They miss you, I told him. Every day. I know. His expression grew serious. Bobby, listen to me. You have a chance I didn't get. A chance to go back. And leave you again? I just found you. I'm not going anywhere, Michael said. I'll be waiting when it's really your time. But that's not now. You have things to do first. The message, I said, remembering Thompson's words. Yes, the message. Michael glanced at Thompson, then back at me. It's important, Bobby. More important than you can imagine. But what is it? I was desperate to understand. You'll know, Michael assured me. When you go back, when you're ready, you'll know. I felt torn, pulled in two directions. The light called to me, promising peace and reunion with my brother. But life called too. Elaine, my parents, some purpose I didn't yet understand. How do I decide? I asked, anguish in my voice. Michael stepped closer, close enough that I could have touched him if I had hands to reach with. Little brother, he said gently, I think you already have. And as he said it, I knew he was right. Much as I longed to stay, to go into that light with him and all the others, I couldn't. Not yet. There was something pulling me back, something beyond just love for those I'd leave behind. Some purpose unfulfilled. Will it hurt? I asked, suddenly afraid. Going back? Michael's expression was sympathetic. Yes. I won't lie to you. It will hurt, but you won't be alone. Will I see you again? Count on it. He smiled that crooked smile once more. Just not too soon, okay? Live your life, Bobby. Live it fully. And remember what? The light, he said simply. Remember the light that enveloped you. Remember what you felt in it. And remember that it's waiting when your real time comes. I wanted to embrace him, to say a proper goodbye, but I had no body here, no arms to wrap around him. Yet somehow I felt his love surround me as surely as if he'd held me. Go now, he said, his voice beginning to fade. They're trying to save you. Let them. The light was receding, or I was moving away from it. The figures, Thompson, Michael, all the others, grew distant, indistinct, and the pain returned. Not gradually, but all at once, a tidal wave of agony that swept away the peace and light. I was back in my body, my broken, bleeding body, and it hurt more than I could have imagined possible. Voices penetrated the pain, urgent and distant. We're losing him. More plasma. Pressure dropping. Come on, kids, stay with us. I wanted to tell them I was trying, that I'd chosen to come back. But I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The darkness was returning, but not the peaceful darkness of before. This was cold, empty blackness. I was slipping away despite my choice, despite my brother's encouragement. No pulse. Starting CPR. Hands on my chest, pushing rhythmically. The pain somehow intensifying with each compression. Come on, Jennings. Fight, damn you. Was that Peterson's voice? I couldn't tell anymore. Everything was fading. And then, just as I was about to surrender to the darkness, the light returned. Not as bright as before, not as all-encompassing, but there. A small flame in the darkness, growing stronger. With all my remaining strength, I focused on that light, reached for it. Not the light of death this time, but the light of life, of return, of purpose. The world rushed back in a cacophony of sound and sensation. Pain, yes, but also the awareness of hands working to save me, of voices calling my name, of cold air in my lungs as I gasped, suddenly and desperately alive. He's back. We've got a pulse. Stabilize him for transport. Hang in there, Jennings. Medevac's coming. I couldn't respond, couldn't even open my eyes. But I was there. I had returned. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain and confusion, I knew I'd brought something back with me. Something important, a message. Through the haze of pain and approaching unconsciousness, I held on to that knowledge. I had died on that Korean hillside, had crossed over, had spoken with the dead, and had returned, enveloped in light, carrying something precious. If only I could remember what it was. I was in and out of consciousness for what felt like days. Brief flashes of awareness punctuated by long stretches of darkness. Voices would swim into focus, then fade away. Hands touching me, pain flaring, then blessed numbness again. The first clear memory I have is of a hospital in Japan. I opened my eyes to find myself in a long ward. Beds filled with broken men, stretching in both directions. The smell of antiseptic and blood and sickness hung heavy in the air. A nurse noticed I was awake and came over. Young, pretty in a tired sort of way, with circles under her eyes that spoke of too many long shifts and too many dying boys. "Welcome back, soldier," she said, checking something on the clipboard at the foot of my bed. "You've been keeping us on our toes." "Water." I managed to croak, my throat feeling like sandpaper. She held a cup with a straw to my lips. The water was warm, but it was the sweetest thing I'd ever tasted. "Where am I?" I asked after drinking. "Tokyo General. You've been here 3 days. Before that, you were at a MASH unit near the front for almost a week." A week. A week of my life gone, just like that. "My unit?" I asked. Her expression softened with sympathy. "I don't know, I'm sorry. But your doctor might. He'll be by on round soon." I tried to take stock of my condition. There was pain, dull and distant thanks to whatever medication they had me on. But I could feel it lurking, waiting to pounce. My chest was heavily bandaged. My left arm was in a cast. My right leg felt strangely numb. "How bad is it?" I asked. The nurse, her name tag read Lieutenant Collins, hesitated. "You took some shrapnel to the chest, collapsed your left lung, broke your left arm in 2 places, and your right leg." She paused. "There was significant damage. The doctors did what they could, but..." She didn't need to finish. I understood what wasn't being said. "Will I walk again?" I asked directly. "Yes," she replied, and I felt a surge of relief. "But it will take time. And work. A lot of work." I nodded, accepting this. Walking with difficulty was better than not walking at all. "There's something else," I said, a memory stirring. "Something important. Something I need to remember." Lieutenant Collins looked concerned. "You had a head injury too. Some memory issues are normal. It might come back in time." But it wasn't a memory of before my injury that I was trying to recall. It was something from that space between life and death, where I'd met my brother, where I'd been given a message to bring back. A message I couldn't remember. Before I could try to explain this, a doctor appeared. Tall, balding, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Corporal Jennings," he said, consulting the chart. "I'm Dr. Abrams. Good to see you with us. You gave us quite a scare." "My unit," I said. "Do you know what happened to them?" "Doctor," Abrams exchanged a glance with Lieutenant Collins. "Your company took heavy casualties, I'm afraid. But they held their position until reinforcements arrived. The Chinese offensive was eventually pushed back. My friends," I pressed. "Peterson, Mickey Callahan, Davis. I don't have specific information," the doctor said, "but I can make inquiries." I nodded, trying not to think about what that might mean. About who might not have made it. "Now, Dr. Abrams continued, "let's talk about you. You're a very lucky young man, Corporal. By all rights, you shouldn't be alive." "I know," I said softly. He looked at me curiously. "Yes, I suppose you would. The medics who brought you in said your heart stopped twice during evacuation." "I remember." I said, though what I remembered wasn't the medical procedures, but the light, the gathering of souls, my brother's face. "Well, Doctor, Abrams said, clearly not understanding, "you've got a long recovery ahead. Multiple surgeries to remove remaining shrapnel. Physical therapy for your leg. But you're young and strong. You should make a good recovery." "When can I go home?" I asked. "To the States? Not for a while yet. A few weeks at minimum, once you're stable enough for the long flight. But you won't be going back to your unit. Your war is over, son." I closed my eyes, a complex mix of emotions washing over me. Relief that I wouldn't have to return to combat. Guilt that I was leaving my comrades behind. Grief for those who might already be gone. And underneath it all, a nagging sense that there was something vitally important I was forgetting. "Rest now, Doctor. Abrams said, patting my uninjured shoulder. "That's the best medicine." After he left, I drifted back to sleep, but my dreams were troubled. Flashes of the battle. The mortar explosion. The battlefield fading away as I floated toward the light. Thompson. Michael. The message. I woke with a start, the word remember echoing in my mind. But remember what? The days passed slowly in that Tokyo hospital. My condition improved gradually. The pain lessened. I began to sit up, to take a few halting steps with assistance. Letters arrived from home. My parents overjoyed that I was alive. Elaine writing pages of love and encouragement. But of my unit, there was little news. The fighting was still fierce. Communication was spotty. I learned that Captain Harris had survived. So had Peterson, though he'd been wounded. Of Mickey and Davis, no word. And still, the nagging sense that I was forgetting something crucial. something I'd been entrusted with, something about the light. 2 weeks after I first regained consciousness, a chaplain came to visit me. A kind-faced man with captain's bars on his collar and tired eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Corporal Jennings," he said, pulling up a chair beside my bed. "I'm Chaplain Morgan. How are you feeling today?" "Better, sir," I replied. "They say I might be heading stateside next week." "That's good news." He smiled, but there was something tentative in his expression. "The nurses mentioned you've been having trouble sleeping." "Nightmares." I hesitated. "Not exactly nightmares. Just trying to remember something." Chaplain Morgan nodded encouragingly. "About the battle?" "About after," I said before I could stop myself. "After?" he prompted gently when I didn't continue. I'd not spoken of my experience to anyone, partly because I wasn't sure they'd believe me, partly because it felt too personal, too sacred somehow. But something about the chaplain's manner invited confidence. "I died," I said simply, "on that hillside. Or at least I was. Somewhere else. And now I can't remember what I was supposed to bring back." I expected skepticism, or perhaps religious platitudes. Instead, Chaplain Morgan leaned forward, his expression intent. "Tell me," he said. So I did. I told him about the light, about Thompson and the other soldiers, about my brother Michael, about being told I had a message to bring back, something important, and about my frustration at not being able to remember what it was. When I finished, the chaplain was silent for a long moment. "You think I'm crazy?" I said. "No," he replied quickly. "No, I don't. I've heard similar accounts before, from other men who've been at the edge." "You have?" The thought that I wasn't alone in this experience was both comforting and startling. "More often than you might think, especially in combat situations." He paused. "We don't talk about it much officially, but I've come to believe these experiences are real and profound." "But what about the message?" I pressed. "I was supposed to remember something, something important, but it's just gone." Chaplain Morgan considered this. "Perhaps it's not gone," he suggested. "Perhaps you're just not ready to remember it yet. Or perhaps the message isn't what you think. Not information, but the experience itself." I frowned, not understanding. "What you experienced, the light, the peace, the certainty that death is not the end, that itself is a powerful message in a world torn by war and suffering," the chaplain explained. "Maybe that's what you were meant to bring back. Your own witness." I wasn't entirely convinced, but his words gave me something to consider. "You really believe I experienced something real? Not just dying brain cells creating hallucinations?" Chaplain Morgan smiled. "Science and faith don't have to be enemies, Corporal. Maybe what you experienced was your brain's way of processing death. Or maybe it was a genuine glimpse beyond the veil. Perhaps it's both. What matters is what you do with the experience." Before he left, the chaplain gave me a small Bible. "For the journey home," he said, "and if you ever want to talk more, I've written my address in the front cover." I was touched by the gesture. "Thank you, sir." "No, thank you," he replied earnestly, "for sharing your story and for coming back." A week later, I was deemed stable enough for transfer back to the United States. The journey was long and uncomfortable. First by military transport plane to Hawaii, then to California, with medical staff monitoring me throughout. When we landed at Travis Air Force Base, I was transferred to Letterman Army Hospital in San Francisco for further treatment. The doctors there were cautiously optimistic about my recovery, but warned it would be a long process. "The shrapnel wounds should heal well," my new doctor explained. "But your leg will require extensive rehabilitation, and there may be lingering effects from the trauma to your chest." I nodded, having heard similar assessments before. "When can my family visit?" "We've already contacted them. They're arranging travel now." 3 days later, my parents arrived. My father, stoic as ever, but with red-rimmed eyes that betrayed his emotion. My mother, crying openly as she kissed my forehead again and again. "My boy," she kept saying. "My boy is alive." My father just gripped my hand, his calloused farmer's palm engulfing mine. "Proud of you, son," he said gruffly. So damned proud. They stayed at a nearby hotel, visiting every day for a week. We talked about home, about the farm, about my recovery. I told them what I could about Korea, carefully editing the worst parts. They told me about neighbors' children who were also serving, about the local boys who hadn't come home. What I didn't tell them was my experience of dying, of seeing Michael. I wasn't sure they were ready to hear it, wasn't sure I was ready to share it. But as they were preparing to return to Nebraska, they couldn't leave the farm unattended for too long. My mother sat beside me, her hand on mine. There's something different about you, she said softly. Something in your eyes. Like you've seen things. I've been in a war, Mom, I replied, trying to deflect. She shook her head. No, it's more than that. It reminds me of my grandfather after his heart stopped. He said he'd been to the other side, that he'd seen the light. She paused, studying my face. You've seen it too, haven't you? I was stunned into silence. How could she know? It's all right, she continued. You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but if you ever want to talk about it, I'll listen. Without judgment, I squeezed her hand, tears welling in my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. After my parents left, my recovery continued. Physical therapy was grueling. Painful exercises to rebuild strength in my damaged leg, to regain flexibility in my scarred chest. There were setbacks, days when the pain was too much, days when I questioned whether I'd ever be whole again, and still that nagging sense that I was forgetting something vital, something just beyond the reach of memory. Letters from Korea trickled in. Peterson wrote that he was recovering from his wounds and would soon be sent home as well. Mickey, I learned, had survived too, though he'd lost his left eye to shrapnel. But Davis hadn't made it. The same mortar that had nearly killed me had taken him instantly. I mourned him quietly, remembering our conversation about God speaking in whispers, about the valley of the shadow of death. Davis had been right. He just hadn't known how right. In late March, nearly 3 months after I'd been wounded, a visitor arrived at the hospital. I was in the PT room, laboriously walking between parallel bars, when one of the nurses came to tell me, "There's a young lady asking for you," she said with a smile. Pretty thing. Says she's come all the way from Nebraska. My heart leaped. Elaine? She didn't give her name. Just said you'd want to see her. I finished my exercises as quickly as I could, changed into a clean hospital robe, and combed my hair. My hands were shaking with anticipation. They brought her to the small day room where ambulatory patients could receive visitors. And there she was. Elaine, more beautiful than I remembered. Her brown hair in soft curls, her blue dress simple but elegant. She stood when she saw me, her eyes filling with tears. "Bobby," she said, and then she was in my arms, careful of my injuries but holding me as if she never wanted to let go. "You came," I murmured into her hair. "You actually came." "Of course I came," she replied, pulling back to look at me. "Did you think I wouldn't? It's a long way from Hastings. I'd have gone twice as far." She touched my face gently. "I had to see for myself that you were really all right." We sat together on a small sofa, holding hands, drinking in the sight of each other. She told me about her journey, the long train ride, the kind strangers who'd helped her navigate San Francisco, her nervousness about seeing me. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid you'd be changed. That what you've been through would have made you different." "I am different," I said honestly. "How could I not be? But my feelings for you haven't changed. If anything, they're stronger." She smiled through tears. "Mine too." We talked for hours until the nurses gently reminded us that visiting hours were ending. Elaine was staying at a boarding house for young women, chaperoned as was proper for the times, but she promised to return the next day. And she did. For a full week, she came every day, bringing sunshine into the sterile hospital environment. We talked about everything and nothing. About the past we'd shared and the future we hoped for. About my recovery and what awaited me when I finally went home. What I didn't talk about was my near-death experience. I wanted to. Several times I came close to telling her, but something held me back. Fear that she wouldn't understand, that she would see me differently, or perhaps fear that in articulating the experience, I would somehow diminish it. On her last day, we sat in a small garden the hospital maintained for patients. It was a clear spring day, the California sunshine warm on our faces. "I hate to leave you," Elaine said, her hand in mine. "I'll be home soon," I assured her. "Another month, maybe 2. Then we can start planning the wedding." She brightened at that. We'd been engaged before I shipped out, in that cautious way of couples separated by war. But now it felt real, imminent. "I'll start looking at dresses," she said, "and we'll need to find somewhere to live. My parents have offered us the old Wilson place until we can afford our own house." "That sounds perfect." I agreed, though in truth I'd barely thought about practical matters like housing. My focus had been entirely on recovery, on getting well enough to go home. As we sat there making plans, a strange feeling came over me. A sense of déjà vu, but stronger, as if I'd seen this moment before, from outside myself. And with it came a fragment of memory, something my brother had said in that space between life and death. "Remember the light, He'd told me, remember what you felt in it. Bobby, what is it? Elaine asked, noticing my distraction. Nothing, I said automatically, then corrected myself. No, not nothing. I just remembered something. Something important. About what? I hesitated, then made a decision. About when I was wounded. About what happened while they were trying to save me. Elaine's expression was concerned but open. Tell me, she said simply. So I did. Haltingly at first, then with increasing confidence, I told her about my experience. About the light. About Thompson and the other soldiers. About seeing Michael. About being told I had a message to bring back. I expected disbelief or concern or even fear. But Elaine listened with complete attention, her eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she squeezed my hand. I believe you, she said. 3 simple words, but they meant everything. You do? I asked. Yes, she replied without hesitation. I don't understand it all. I don't know if anyone can. But I believe you experienced something real and profound. Tears welled in my eyes. I still can't remember the message, I admitted. I know there was something specific I was supposed to bring back, but it's like trying to hold on to a dream. The harder I try to grasp it, the more it slips away. Elaine considered this. Maybe it's not meant to be remembered all at once, she suggested. Maybe it will come to you in pieces when you're ready. Her words echoed what Chaplain Morgan had said, and I found comfort in that parallel. Or maybe, Elaine continued, the message isn't words at all. Maybe it's just the certainty that there's more, that death isn't the end, that love continues. I looked at her in wonder. This young woman from small-town Nebraska, who'd never been further than Omaha before this trip, had articulated what I'd been struggling to understand. I love you, I said, the words inadequate for what I was feeling. She smiled, radiant in the spring sunshine. I love you too, and I can't wait to spend the rest of our lives together. When Elaine left the next day, I felt both her absence keenly and a new sense of purpose. I attacked my physical therapy with renewed vigor, pushed myself harder in my exercises, cooperated fully with the doctors and nurses. Someone's motivated. My physical therapist commented as I forced myself to take step after painful step. Got a girl waiting for me, I explained, and a message to deliver. He didn't ask about the second part, just nodded and encouraged me to do one more lap. By mid-May, I was walking with only a slight limp and the assistance of a cane. My lung capacity was improving, though I still had occasional shortness of breath. The doctors declared me ready for discharge and transfer to a VA facility closer to home for continued outpatient care. Before I left Letterman, I wrote to Chaplain Morgan in Tokyo, thanking him for his kindness and updating him on my progress. I mentioned my conversation with Elaine and how her acceptance had helped me begin to integrate my experience. I still haven't fully remembered the message. I wrote, but I'm starting to think that perhaps the message is the journey itself. The knowing that there's more than just this physical existence. The certainty that love transcends death. His reply reached me just before I left San Francisco. Dear Corporal Jennings, he wrote, your letter brought me great joy. I have thought of you often and prayed for your recovery. What you say about the message resonates deeply with me. In my years as a chaplain, I have come to believe that the greatest truths are not contained in words but in experiences, in connections, in moments of transcendence like the one you described. Perhaps your task is not to remember a specific message, but to live in the light of what you've experienced, to be changed by it, and to allow that change to touch others, to bear witness in your own way to the love and light you encountered. I would be honored to continue our correspondence if you wish. I believe you have much to teach me, and perhaps I can offer some small guidance in return. May God bless your journey home and your reunion with your beloved Elaine. I read his letter several times, finding in it both comfort and challenge. To live in the light of what I'd experienced, to be changed by it, to bear witness. Yes, I thought. That feels right. The journey home to Nebraska was long but manageable. A military transport to Chicago, then a commercial flight to Omaha, where my parents and Elaine were waiting. Their faces when they saw me walking toward them, leaning on my cane but otherwise under my own power, filled me with a joy I can hardly describe. Home was both familiar and strange. The farm looked smaller somehow, the horizons closer. My old room, preserved exactly as I'd left it, felt like it belonged to a different person. The boy I'd been before Korea, before the mortar attack, before the light. Recovery continued. Twice weekly trips to the VA hospital in Lincoln for physical therapy and checkups. Gradual reintegration into the rhythms of farm life, doing what work I could manage with my still healing body, planning for the future with Elaine, who visited almost daily. And through it all, fragments of memory continued to surface. Not the full message, not yet, but pieces of my experience beyond the veil. The peace I'd felt in the light, the love that had surrounded me, the sense of being part of something vast and beautiful and beyond full comprehension. Sometimes these memories would come in dreams. Sometimes during quiet moments working in the fields with my father. Sometimes in church where I found myself attending more regularly than I had before the war. One Sunday in July, about 2 months after my return home, the sermon was about Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus, how he was blinded by a light from heaven and heard the voice of Christ. As the preacher spoke, something resonated deep within me. Not the specifics of Paul's experience, which was different from mine in many ways, but the essence of it. A profound encounter that changed the course of a life. A calling to bear witness. After the service, I lingered, waiting until most of the congregation had left. Then I approached Pastor Miller, a kind elderly man who'd baptized me as an infant and had known my family for decades. "Pastor," I said, "do you have a moment?" "Of course, Robert," he replied, using my full name as he always had. "What can I do for you?" "I'd like to talk to you about something that happened to me in Korea. Something unusual." We sat in his small office and I told him my story. About dying on that frozen hillside. About the light. About my brother and the others who'd greeted me. About being told I had a message to bring back. Pastor Miller listened without interruption, his weathered face thoughtful. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you for sharing this with me," he said finally. "It's a remarkable experience. Do you believe it was real?" I asked directly. "I believe you experienced it as real," he replied carefully. "And I see no reason to doubt that God could work in such ways." Throughout Scripture, we find accounts of visions, of encounters with the divine, of experiences beyond ordinary reality. He reached for his Bible and turned to a familiar passage in 1 Corinthians. "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then, face to face," he read. "Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known." "You think I was granted a glimpse of what comes after?" I said. "A partial glimpse through that dark glass." "Perhaps," Pastor Miller nodded. "Or perhaps God used the imagery and understanding available to you to communicate something you needed to know." Either way, the experience clearly had profound meaning. "But what about the message?" I asked, returning to my persistent concern. "I was told I was being sent back with something important to share, but I can't remember what it was." Pastor Miller considered this. "May I suggest something? Perhaps instead of trying to remember a specific message, you might consider how your experience has changed you. What truths it has revealed to you. How it has altered your understanding of life and death, of purpose and meaning." His words echoed what Chaplain Morgan had written, what Elaine had suggested. A pattern was emerging, a consistent interpretation that I couldn't ignore. "You think the message is in how I've been changed?" I said slowly. "And in how you might change others by sharing your experience." Pastor Miller added, "Not everyone will believe you, of course. Some will dismiss your account as a dream or hallucination. But for those with ears to hear, your testimony could be powerful indeed." As summer turned to fall, I continued to heal, both physically and spiritually. My limp grew less pronounced. My nightmares became less frequent. And I began, cautiously at first, to share my experience with others. Not with everyone. Not as some kind of public testimony, but with individuals who seemed open, who were struggling with their own questions about life and death, meaning and purpose. With my mother, who cried when I described seeing Michael, but found comfort in knowing he was at peace, surrounded by light and love. With my father, who was more skeptical, but who sat silent and thoughtful after I described my brother's message that I should live fully. With a cousin who'd lost his wife to cancer and who found in my account a reason to hope they might be reunited. With a neighbor whose son had died in the Pacific and who'd been angry at God ever since. Each telling was different, shaped to the person and their needs. Each response was unique. Some found comfort. Some asked questions. Some clearly doubted but were kind enough not to say so directly. And with each telling, I found that more details of my experience became accessible. Not the elusive message I'd been seeking, but richer recall of the feelings, the perceptions, the knowing that had accompanied my journey to the light and back. Elaine and I were married in October, a small ceremony in the same church where I'd spoken with Pastor Miller. As she walked down the aisle toward me, radiant in a gown sewn by her mother and grandmother, I felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it nearly brought me to my knees. I had been given this chance to love and be loved, this opportunity to build a life with this remarkable woman, this gift of additional days on earth, when by all rights I should have died on that Korean hillside. At the reception, Peterson showed up unexpectedly. He'd been discharged and was making his way back to Chicago, but had detoured to Nebraska when he'd heard about the wedding. Couldn't miss Nebraska's big day, he said, clapping me on the shoulder with his good arm, the other still in a sling. We found a quiet corner away from the festivities. Two damaged men with too many memories. Any word from Mickey? I asked. Got a letter last month. He's stateside, adjusting to life with one eye. Peterson shook his head. Says the dames still like him, though. Nothing keeps that Mick down. We shared a laugh, then fell silent, both no doubt thinking of those who hadn't come home. Davis, Thompson, so many others. Sarge, I said after a while, can I tell you something? Something that might sound crazy? Kid, after what we've been through, nothing sounds crazy anymore. So I told him. About dying. About the light. About seeing Thompson and my brother. About being sent back with a message. I expected disbelief, or at least skepticism. Peterson had always been practical, grounded, not given to flights of fancy. But he listened with complete attention, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he took a long pull from his beer before responding. I saw something too, he said finally, his voice low. When I got hit, not as detailed as your experience. I didn't go as far, I guess. But there was a light and a feeling of, I don't know how to describe it, like coming home after a long journey. I stared at him, stunned. In all the times I'd told my story, no one had responded with a similar account. You never mentioned it, I said. Peterson shrugged. Not something you talk about with your men, not when you're trying to keep them focused on staying alive. He paused. And honestly, I tried to forget it. Tried to tell myself it was just shock or loss of blood. But hearing your story, he shook his head. It brings it all back. Do you think it was real? I asked. I don't know what it all means anymore, Peterson replied. But I know what I experienced. And I know you're not the kind of man who makes things up. We talked for another hour, comparing details, finding similarities and differences in our experiences. Peterson hadn't gone as deeply into the light as I had, hadn't encountered specific individuals, but the feeling of peace, of welcome, of homecoming was the same. Have you told anyone else? I asked. Just my mother, he said. She's Catholic, very devout. She took it as confirmation of everything she's always believed. He smiled slightly. First time I've seen her look at me with something like respect. Like maybe I'm not such a disappointment after all. You could never be a disappointment, I said firmly. You were the best damn sergeant in Korea. Peterson laughed, a genuine laugh that took years off his face. And you were a decent corporal. When you weren't daydreaming about your girl. As the reception wound down, Peterson prepared to leave. He had a train to catch, a journey to continue. Keep in touch, I said as we shook hands goodbye. Let me know where you end up. You too, Nebraska. He hesitated, then pulled me into a brief, awkward hug. And keep telling your story. People need to hear it, especially those who've lost someone. They need to know there's something waiting. Something good. His words stayed with me long after he'd gone. Kept coming back to me in the months that followed as Elaine and I settled into married life in a small rented house on the edge of town. People need to hear it. Was that the message I'd been trying to remember? Not something specific to tell, but the act of telling itself? The sharing of what I'd experienced? The idea gained strength one evening in late November as Elaine and I were listening to the radio. There was a news report about Korea where the fighting continued despite peace talks. So many dead, so many families grieving. I wish I could tell them, I said aloud. Tell who? Elaine asked, looking up from her knitting. The families. The ones getting telegrams like the one my parents got about Michael. I wish I could tell them what I saw. That their sons, their husbands, their brothers aren't really gone. That there's a light waiting for all of us. Elaine put down her knitting and came to sit beside me on the sofa. Maybe you can, she said. What do you mean? Not individually, of course. There are too many. But maybe, in a broader way, your experience isn't just for you, Bobby. It's a gift. A gift you're meant to share. I considered this. How? I'm not a preacher, not a writer, just a farmer's son who went to war and came back different. I don't know exactly, Elaine admitted, but I believe the opportunity will present itself when the time is right. She was more right than either of us knew. The opportunity came in April 1953, almost a year and a half after I'd nearly died on that Korean hillside. I was almost fully recovered physically, though I still walked with a slight limp and had occasional pain from my healed wounds. Elaine and I were expecting our first child. Life had acquired a sweet normalcy that I cherished every day. I was in Lincoln for a routine checkup at the VA hospital when I ran into another Korean War veteran in the waiting room. We got to talking, sharing the usual details, units, locations when we'd served. He'd been wounded at the Chosun Reservoir, evacuated with frostbite and a bullet wound to the shoulder. "Lucky to make it out alive," he said. A lot of my buddies didn't. Something in his voice, a hollowness, a lingering grief, made me take a risk. "Can I tell you something?" I asked. "Something about what happened to me over there?" He nodded and I shared my experience. Not the full account, but enough. The light, the peace, the certainty that death was not the end. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Then, my brother died at Chosin," he said quietly. "I've been angry about it ever since. Angry at the Chinese, at our commanders, at God. But what you just described," he shook his head, tears in his eyes. "That helps. It really does." As I left the hospital that day, a nurse stopped me. She'd overheard part of my conversation in the waiting room. "That was a beautiful thing you did," she said. "That man has been coming here for over a year, and I've never seen him look at peace before." I thanked her, embarrassed by the praise. "Have you ever considered speaking to groups?" she asked. "We have veteran support meetings here at the hospital. I think many of them would benefit from hearing your story." I hesitated. Sharing my experience one-on-one was one thing. Speaking to a group was quite another. "I'm not much of a public speaker," I demurred. "Just think about it," she urged. "We meet on Thursday evenings. You'd be welcome anytime." I did think about it. Discussed it with Elaine, who encouraged me to try. Prayed about it, seeking guidance. And finally, 2 weeks later, I returned to the hospital on a Thursday evening. The group was small, about 15 veterans, most from Korea, a few older men from World War II. They welcomed me warmly, and when the facilitator asked if anyone wanted to share, I found myself raising my hand. "My name is Robert Jennings," I began, my voice shaky. "I served with the 7th Infantry Division in Korea. In November 1951, I was hit by a mortar round and declared dead twice during evacuation." I took a deep breath. "But in between those times, something happened to me. Something I've been trying to understand ever since." The room was silent as I told my story. Every eye was on me. Some men nodded in recognition. Others looked skeptical, but all listened. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then an older man, a World War II veteran with a Purple Heart pin on his jacket, spoke up. "I never told anyone this," he said, his voice unsteady. "Not my wife, not my priest, no one. But at Normandy, I took shrapnel to the chest. Medics thought I was gone. And I saw something similar. A light, a feeling of peace like nothing I've ever known. And my brother who died at Guadalcanal was there, telling me it wasn't my time." His words opened a floodgate. Another man shared a similar experience from the Battle of the Bulge. Another from Heartbreak Ridge in Korea. Not every story was identical to mine, but the common elements were striking. The light, the peace, the sense of being welcomed home, often by those who had gone before. And there were questions from those who hadn't had such experiences, but who had lost friends, brothers, sons. Was it real? Were their loved ones truly at peace? Would they see them again? I answered as honestly as I could, neither promising more than I knew, nor understating the profound certainty I'd brought back from my journey to the light. That evening marked a turning point. The nurse who'd invited me asked if I'd be willing to come back, to make my story a regular part of the group's healing process. I agreed. Soon I was speaking at other veterans groups, then at grief support groups for families who'd lost someone in Korea, then at churches, community centers, anywhere people were grappling with questions of mortality, meaning, and what might await us beyond this life. I never claimed special knowledge or authority. I simply shared what I had experienced, what I had seen and felt and known in that space between life and death. I answered questions as best I could, always emphasizing that my experience was just one glimpse, one perspective on mysteries far greater than any of us. And something remarkable happened. People began to share their own stories with me. Not just veterans, but people from all walks of life who had brushed against death and glimpsed something beyond. A farmer who'd been struck by lightning, a young mother who'd nearly died in childbirth, an elderly woman who'd suffered a heart attack and been revived. Different circumstances, different details, but the same essential experience. A journey toward light, a feeling of profound peace and love, a sense of coming home. As I collected these stories, patterns emerged. Common elements that transcended differences of background, belief, education. These weren't just subjective hallucinations, I became convinced. They were glimpses of something real, something waiting for all of us. And as I listened to others, as I continued to share my own experience, I finally understood the message I'd been struggling to remember. It hadn't been a specific set of words or instructions. It had been much simpler and much more profound. Remember the light. Remember what you felt in it. And help others remember too. That was the message my brother had given me. That was why I'd been sent back. Not to deliver some esoteric knowledge, but to bear witness to the most essential truth. That love continues. That consciousness persists. That what awaits us is not darkness, but light. This understanding didn't come all at once, but gradually, like a photograph is slowly developing, the image becoming clearer with time. And with it came a deepening sense of purpose. By the time our daughter was born in June 1953, we named her Michelle after my brother Michael. I had spoken to hundreds of people about my experience, had corresponded with dozens more who'd read about me in local newspapers or heard about me through word of mouth. Holding my newborn daughter, looking into her innocent face, I felt a circle completing. I had been granted this chance to be a father, to watch this new life unfold. And in return, I had a responsibility to share what I'd learned, to bear witness to the light that awaits us all. She's beautiful, Elaine whispered, tired but radiant in her hospital bed. Perfect. I agreed, carefully placing our daughter back in her arms. Absolutely perfect. As I watched them together, mother and child, a wave of emotion swept over me. Gratitude. Oh, love. And a bone-deep certainty that all of this, was part of something larger than I could fully comprehend. Something beautiful. Something sacred. I thought of that frozen hillside in Korea, of the mortar explosion that had nearly ended my life, of the journey to the light and back, of all that had followed, the pain and healing, the remembering and forgetting, the gradual understanding of what I'd been sent back to do. And I thought of Davis, reading his Bible in our foxhole. My grandmother used to say that God speaks in whispers, not shouts. He'd told me, you got to be real quiet to hear him. He'd been right. The message hadn't come as a thunderbolt of revelation. It had come gradually in whispers, in moments of quiet reflection, in conversations with others who'd glimpsed the same light. Remember the light. Remember what you felt in it. And help others remember too. Looking at my wife and newborn daughter, I made a silent promise. I would remember. I would continue to share what I'd experienced, to bear witness to the light that had enveloped me. Not for fame or attention, but because it was true, because it mattered, because people needed to hear it. And whenever doubt crept in, whenever the memory faded or the mundane concerns of daily life threatened to overshadow what I'd learned, I would return to this moment. This perfect moment of love and light and absolute certainty that we are part of something greater than ourselves. Something that continues beyond death. Something that waits for all of us. Like a homecoming. Like a reunion with everyone we've ever loved. I died in Korea in a mortar attack. I saw the light. I came back with a message. And the message is this. The light is real. It's waiting. And love never ends.